Good morning, everybody. Back today, we're going to be talking about the Leviathan mission card deck. I don't actually have my hands on the deck, but I found a Google Doc someone made online of all the stuff on the cards. Found it on Reddit. Very useful. So, unfortunately, I'm not big enough to have gotten any of the pre-distributed boxes that they did to some of the bigger channels. So I just making do with what I have. But go ahead and break down these missions. This is going to be the main way most of us are going to be playing 40k if we are mostly competitive players. So Leviathan chapter-proof battle is waged by following sequence below. Chapter-proof battles are designed for incursion and strike force battle sizes. So mostly strike force, which is the 2,000 point level, was what I was assuming most of us will be playing. 1. You muster your armies. Players first muster armies as described in the core rules. Remember, all details of a player's army must be recorded on the army roster. This is just your army building. Then you determine the mission. So you split the cards into their respective decks. Deployment deck, mission rule deck, primary mission deck, secondary mission decks. 1 for attacker, 1 to defender. So there's going to be 2. Other than the color of the cards, I believe they're exactly the same for the secondary missions, and each player gets 1. Then you have the Gambit decks, also 1 for attacker, 1 for defender. Set aside the secondary mission and Gambit decks. Player will receive these later. You determine your mission by shuffling and randomly drawing 1 card from deployment, mission rule, and primary mission decks. Most tournaments, I'm assuming the TOs are going to be predetermining these, whether they randomly draw them and write it down and let you know, or whether they just have an idea of, all right, this mission rule works better with this mission deployment, but I would assume most tournaments will have those presets, so you're playing the same game, same mission on every board, as is kind of normal now. But I'm sure there'll be some littler RTTs and stuff where you're going to randomly draw each table, once they determine that, you go into, you read your mission, you read your primary mission and your mission rule that you've drawn. It tells you how to do your primary, score victory points, and any special mission rule for the mission. Then you place objective markers. And most of the time, the deployment card will show you where the objectives are to be deployed. So there's already preset spots for them. You just have to put them out. Then create the battlefield. This will be setting up your terrain, depending on whether your store is using preset terrain or player placed will determine this. If you're doing pre-placed, like if they're using some of the GW formats, or if GW releases new formats, this will be already set for you, so you don't have to worry about this step. If it's player placed, then they don't really give too much in depth here, but I'm assuming it will, until something's changed and we get a few missions in, be very similar to the standard FLG setups people use now for deploying player placed. And once there's a few big events in, maybe they'll determine that needs to be tweaked, but for now I'm assuming we'll start off with that. Then you determine the attacker and defender. Who will be attacker? This will decide which player uses which deployment zone in the coming battle. Players take their respective secondary mission and Gambit decks, shuffle them, and place them nearby for later. Alright, so this is sounding like you don't get to pick your deployment zone. You choose attacker or defender, and the card will have preset red and green telling you which side of the table you will be on, depending on which one you pick. Then there are 2 secondary mission decks, 1 for attacker, 1 for defender. Each player can draw the same. Yeah, so they're exactly the same. Describes the goals that you're trying to achieve to score victory points. Each secondary mission card will detail when and how it is achieved, as well as how many VP that player scores for achieving it. Each player must now choose whether to use fixed or tactical missions. For competitive play, this is going to be the one of the biggest changes. Those who take fixed, you only get 2 secondary missions now, and they stay the same through the whole game, so that's kind of similar. Or you can do the tactical, which It's more like the old Tempest of War or Maelstrom or stuff like that, where you're drawing each turn different missions you have to achieve, which will, I'm assuming, you're going to have to build a more mobile force that's able to react to what you get to play those. And also, I haven't seen one here yet, but they've changed primary to a max of 50 instead of 45, and secondary to a max of 40 instead of 45. So primary is a little more important. And if you take the two fixed, they're maxed at 20 each instead of 15 each. But you still can't get more than 20, so you can't do 30 on one and 10 on the other. You still have to try to achieve both fairly equally. And then there's no max on the tactical, because it just tells you what you score, and then you discard it and draw a new one, so that's what it is. So you just have to try to get your 40 that way. And then once you've decided what you're doing and drawn your cards, you move on. So yeah, if you do your fixed, you pick them right at the beginning. If you're doing tactical, you will be, or if you do fixed, you draw them, not draw, you just pick them out at the beginning. If you're doing tactical, you draw them at the beginning of each of your turns, I believe. Yeah, at the start of their command phase. So if you're going second turn, on the first player's turn, you really don't know what your secondaries are going to be for the first turn. So they're just kind of doing their turn. You just have to decide how you're going to react, just to see you deal with some of their units and protect yourself without necessarily knowing how you're going to have to react secondary-wise. Then you declare the battle formations. For the most part, these, I'm assuming, will be on your army sheet. I'm assuming you can't be like, if you're a Space Marine player, like, oh, I'm doing Blood Angels this turn, and the next turn, oh, I'd rather be just generic, whatever the generic Marine one is this turn, or this battle round. Not battle round, tournament round. So I'm assuming that, for tournament play, I'm assuming that will be listed on your army sheet. If not, that would really be a boon for an advantage for Marine players, people who have possible access to different formations. But I'm assuming that'll be a preset thing you have to take. Then you say before the tournament, you say which units have leaders attached to them, which units are in transports, what's going to start in reserve, including strategic. No more than half the number of units in a player's army can start the battle in reserves, and the combined points total of those units cannot be more than half the total of their army units embarked within a transport that are set in reserves. Also, so it's just like now, half your units, half your points, stuff that's in transports, stuff that's embarked in transports in reserves counts, and if it's on the table, it doesn't. All right, and so strategic reserve, it doesn't say it here, but in the main rulebook, you're limited to 25%. So at 2,000 points, you can have 500 in strategic reserve. That leaves you another 500 to do deep strike, any kind of regular reserve if you wanted to. Unless you don't use strategic reserve, then you can eat into that points too. But you can't have more than 1,000 points, or half your and half your units in reserve. And then once you do that, you reveal it to each other. Reserves cannot arrive during the first battle round, and any strategic reserves or reserves that have not arrived on the battle by the end of the third battle round count as having been destroyed, as are any units embarked within them. All right, so this is a change from the core rulebook. So tournament play, we still have to bring reserves in on turn 2 or 3. There's no waiting till later. I thought that would have been a little interesting if they let that be, but I guess depending on, because of stuff that happened in last edition that originally forced this change, they're going to stick with this. So your reserves, unless you have a special rule, has to come in turn 2 or 3, and if they don't, will be destroyed. All right, then you deploy armies. So defender deploys the first unit. Have to be wholly set up in their deployment zone. If you finish, yeah. So that's pretty much exactly the way it is now. Defender sets up first. Then you roll off, determine first turn. Winner takes first turn. So once again, no choice. If you win the roll, you will go first. Then you resolve any pre-battle moves. This will be like scouts or redeploys or anything like that you have. Then you begin the battle. Players consider to roll out until the battle ends. At the end of each player's turn, if that player is using tactical missions, they can discard one or more of their active secondary mission cards. If they do, and it is not the 5th battle round, that player gains 1 CP. This represents high command diverting strategic resources that have been allowed to now obsolete objectives to instead engage new targets of opportunity. At the end of the 3rd battle round, players generate Gambits. Alright. So yeah, so at the end of your was it the end of your turn? Yeah, so at the end of your turn, if you have a tactical that you don't think you can be able to achieve, or it's not worth that many points, the CP is more useful, you can just discard it, get a CP, draw another one to replace it next turn. And then at the end of the 3rd battle round is when you have the option to generate your Gambits, which we'll go over more when we get down to the actual breakdown of the cards. Then, yeah, after 5 battle rounds, the game's over. If one player has no battles remaining in their army at the start of their turn, the other player can continue to play out their turn until the battle ends, so there's no sudden end of game when your opponent loses all their models. Then, yeah, the player with the most VP is the winner. If the players are tied, the battle is a draw. You can score a maximum of 50 VP from primary and or Gambits. Any excess VP are lost, and a maximum of 40 from secondary. Any excess VP are lost, for a possible total of 90 points. If players using fixed missions, that player can score a maximum of 20 VP for each of the fixed mission cards they select before the battle. If every model in the player's army is painted in battle ready standard, that player awards a bonus of 10. This gives each player a maximum total score of 100, which is still a total score of 100. Still 10 for being battle ready, but it's just split up 50 to 40 between primary and secondary instead of 45 and 45. Then we have the new order stratagem. This is for only if you take the tactical missions, not for fixed. Costs 1 CP. End of your command phase. One of your active secondary mission cards. Discard it and draw 1 new secondary mission card. You can only use this once for battle. Alright, so this can't be used if you took fixed. But if you take tactical and you just got 2 cards that just, man, I can't do anything with these. Or at least one decent one battle, you can just discard one of your cards and draw a new one. Then there are 2 Gambit decks, one for each player with a number of cards. They contain challenging goals that players can attempt to achieve by the end of the battle round or by the end of the battle instead of attempting to score any more VP from the primary mission. So basically what these do is there's 3 possible ones. If you achieve it, you get 30 victory points at the end of the game, but you choose it on turn 3, and so you give up scoring the regular primary mission for turns 4 and 5. So most of the time you have depending on how the game is, you could possibly score up to 15 for. So instead of the chance of scoring 15 and 15, you just give those up for a Hail Mary at a 30. So if you kept playing the regular, you could score 5, 10, 15. So, you could get between 0 and 30 somewhere in there. Whereas if you take the Gambit, there's no in between. There's 0 or 30. It's like all or nothing. Alright, and so now we're going to get a breakdown of the cards. So here's the deployment decks. We have Search and Destroy, which is the old table quarters. And you see how they have a red for attacker, green for defender. So if you guys were playing this and you did the roll-off, attacker would have to take this side, defender would have to take this side. There's no, I want to be defender and take that side. No, if you want to be defender, you have to take this side. We'll see if tournaments enforce that, but based on the rules as they're written in here, that's the way it's meant to be. And on this one, 9 inches from the center, so you're going to be 18 inches from each deployment zone. Or then you got, so it's 5 objectives, 1 center in each table corner, 1 dead center. This says 16 inches. I'm not sure what this 16 inches is, because if it's measuring from the middle, if you're 9 inches, 9 and 9 should be 18. So I'm not exactly sure what this 16 inches is supposed to be. Is that a typo, or is it supposed to be? I'm not sure what else that is supposed to be representing. Because you're going to be 30 and 22 on these measurements. Unless it's maybe 16 inches. No, because from the objective, 3 inches would be. Maybe it's 16 inches from the edge of the objective. No, that should be 17 on both sides. Or I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what that 16 stands for. Then over here we got a regular old Dawn of War. So you got one in the middle. So one 20 inches from the middle in on the center line, 20 inches away, and then these are 12 inches down. And then, so is it 12 inch? Oh, and then another 4, so it's going to be 16 inches away for the objective. I'm guessing 12 inches of the deployment zone and 4 inches from the edge of your deployment zone. And if 12 inches of deployment, so there's going to be 10-inch deployment zones again. That's weird the way they did that. Like last edition, they had like a second line, but so these are basically 16 inches over from the center, and then your deployments are going to be 12 inches from the center. All right, and then we got a sweeping engagement. This is a corner to half this way. In last edition, I think we had a corner to half here. So now they changed it more. It's longer but narrower triangle. So you're going to have one in the center, and then they're going to have a weird offset here. So your first one's going to be 12 inches away from the center this way, and then 16 down. The other's 20 inches away from the center, then 8 down. And then the same thing repeated on the other side. So you got this weird, like, zigzag pattern on the objectives. That's interesting. We'll see how that plays. Brand new deployment, so that's always exciting. So something we haven't seen. Then Crucible of Battle. All right, this is more the the corner to half like we had in the last edition. I'm pretty sure we had this. If I remember right, we did. I kind of remember setting this up. So in this, you're going to be here. You're going to go 10 inches, and then 14, and then 16 inches and 12. It also has a kind of zigzag pattern. So those will be interesting. That's a little different than anything we saw last edition, I believe. I do like it better than the one where the two objectives were like just barely off-centered, if you know what mission I'm talking about from last edition. And then we got Hammer and Anvil, standard old Hammer and Anvil. So once again, one in the middle, and then two sideways 16 inches away, and then down 20 inches from it each way. So then you're going to have 18-inch deployment zones again. Pretty standard looking mission, nothing crazy. So we got 5 different deployment maps. And then we got a primary mission deck. So this is going to be, so you're going to choose that as your deployment, and then this will give you your how you're going to score your primary points each game. So the first one is Take and Hold. No special. Then starting on Battle Round 2, at the end of each command phase, the player whose turn it is scores 5 victory points for each objective marker they control, up to 15 victory points per turn. Alright, so last edition you could, it was hold 1, most missions was hold 1, hold 2, hold more. So if you had 1 objective and your opponent had none, you got 10. If you had 2 objectives and your opponent had 1 or less, you got 15. So now to get 10, you always have to hold 2. And to get 15, you have to control 3. So that's a slight difference, but I actually like that a little better. So you just get 5 points for every victory marker or objective you control. So very simple. Third the same way, fourth the same way. Can I scroll this over? And does this not scroll over? I guess I should have checked that earlier. There we go. No, maybe not. There it goes. Come on. Alright, the player who has the first turn scores as described above. Alright, so once again, the player going second will score at the end of their turn instead of at the command phase on round 5. Let's see. Can we do this? There we go. And then there's nothing at the end of the battle. Alright. And then the second one is Scorched Earth. So here's a special rule for the second one. From the second battle round, each player's shooting phase, the player whose turn it is can select 1 unit from their army that is not battle shot and is eligible to shoot. Until the end of that turn, that unit is not eligible to shoot or declare a charge. The start of his controlling player's next command phase, if that unit is within 1 inch of an objective marker that the player whose turn it is in controls, that objective marker is burned and removed from the battlefield. Alright, so this is kind of like the old raise actions you could do in the raise mission last edition. But you don't just have to control it. You have to be within 1 inch of an objective marker and control it. But as long as you're controlling it, you can do it. So even if there's enemy models there, if you have control of it, you can raise it. All right. And then it looks like, other than that, turns 2, 3, and 4. You score 5 victory points for each objective, just like in the one before. And then turn 5, same thing. And it's just at the end of the battle, you score 5 victory points if one or more objective markers in no man's land were burned by a unit from their army, and 10 if the objective marker in your opponent's deployment zone was burned. All right. So you only have to burn 1 in no man's land to get 5. Even if you burn 2 or 3 in no man's land, it's still only worth 5. And then if you burn the 1 in your opponent's deployment zone, it's worth 10 for a possible 15 if you burn 1 in no man's land and 1 in your opponent's deployment zone. All right, so that's one is useful, especially if you can burn one that they could easily control if you can get to it early or something, and then kind of like sacrifice a unit or something. If you could sacrifice a unit to do that early, but set the rest of your army up to defend the other side, force them to have to really swing hard that way. Like, I'm sure it won't be easy to do, but if you pull it off, even without the 5 victory points, changing the number of objectives and skewing it so you have more in the areas you want them in could be a big thing. So we'll see how easy or often that's pulled off. Then the next one is Purge the Foe. At the end of the battle round, each player scores 4 victory points if one or more enemy units were destroyed that battle round, and an extra 4 victory points if more enemy units than friendly units were destroyed that battle round. Note that a unit can, if it is returned to the battlefield for any reason, potentially contribute to this primary mission several times, assuming it is returned and subsequently destroyed several times over. Alright, so if you kill a unit and it comes back, you still get your points, and then you can get points for killing it again. Alright, so it's kill more. And then at the end of each command phase, the player whose turn it is scores 4 victory points if they control 1 or more objective markers, and an extra 4 victory points if they control more objective markers than their opponent's control. Alright, so it looks like starting from turn 1 on, you can kill more, and then starting turn 2 through turn 5, you can hold more. And then battle round 5, it's still the second player gets to hold at the end of their turn. So it looks like you could potentially get 16 battle points per turn. So you could go 16, 32, 64, plus the 8 the first round. So you have the chance to score 72, which would get limited down to 50. So this is a mission where if things work out, you could reasonably see both people in a very close game score 50. If I'm killing more, you're hold more, but we're both also killing and holding, we'd both be getting 12 per turn, 12, 24, 36, 48, and then if you get 1 kill on the first turn, you're both maxing, not 40. I can't do math. So 8, 12. All right, so maybe you can't both get 50. Maybe you could. Sorry, my brain can't work that out, but you both can get up in the 40s with this. I mean, you can on the others too, but this just seems like more like the old ITC where like one person's holding better, one person's killing better, but they're both also killing and holding every turn. And it's really going to come down to secondaries because you're really just keeping secondary or primary like within points of each other. So that's interesting. That's a throwback to, what was it, 8th edition? 8th edition ITC tournaments. So it's nice to see that the primary isn't going to be just hold the same objectives every turn. Like killing actually matters in this one. Then we got Sites of Power. The objective marker is No Man's Land or Sites of Power. The objective markers in No Man's Land or Sites of Power. At the end of each command phase, the player whose turn it is empowers all sites of power that they control that have 1 or more characters from their army within range. Each site of power remains empowered by that player while 1 or more of their character models remains within range of it. Alright, so at the start of your command phase, or at the end of your command phase, if you have a character on objective, you can turn it on. I'll see what that does, though. At the end of each player's command phase, this player's turn scores victory points as follows, up to 15. 3 for each objective marker they control, 3 for each site of power they have empowered. All right, so basically you get 3 for an objective. If you have it empowered, you get 6. Note that these are cumulative, so players that control one objective marker they have also empowered will score 6 VP that turn. All right. And it's for each. So yeah, so each one, so if you do it on multiple ones, you get 6 for each. All right, so you don't auto get the 3 or auto get the 5 like in the other, but you have the potential to get 6. So we'll see, depending on how many characters and how the game's playing out, it may be easier or harder for you, depending on how you built your army, to get to your 50. And that goes the same all the way till battle round 5. So and just the same, it's the same except it's at the end of their turn instead of the command phase. So no other extra ways to score points. It's just you get the special rules is turning on the sites of power. So it's objective based like normal, but you have this little extra wrinkle in it. All right, so players turn. So does it turn off once they leave No Man's Land? And it's only the ones in No Man's Land. The player's turn is empowers all sites of power they control that have one or more character models from their army within range. Each site remains powered by that player while one or other character models remains within. All right, so if the character leaves, it does turn off. All right. So I was just double checking. You couldn't turn it on with your character, move on to another one, but as long as you held it, it stayed powered. No. So you have to leave the character on. You have to basically reactivate it, empower it every turn. Interesting. So then we have the ritual. When setting up the battlefield, remove all objective markers in No Man's Land except the one closest to the center of the battlefield. Oh, so that means in a lot of missions you're only going to have 3 to start with. In each player's shooting phase, the player whose turn it is can select one unit from their army that is not battle shot and is eligible to shoot. Until the end of that turn, that unit is not eligible to shoot or declare a charge. At the end of that turn, the player whose turn it is can set up one objective marker wholly within No Man's Land and within 1 inch of that unit, provided it can be set up exactly 9 inches from one other objective marker and not within 6 inches of any other objective marker. Alright, so the first time you do that, you'll have to set up the objective 9 inches from the first objective. And then within 1 inch of your unit and wholly in No Man's Land. And then once you start setting up multiple, you can't set them up within 6 inches of another objective, but they have to be within 9 of another objective. All right, and I don't see a limit on how many you can do. So that's interesting. So you're going to have less objectives at the beginning of the game, but depending on how it goes, you're going to start adding objectives. But they can also be scored by your opponents. You got to be careful where you add them. All right, so that's a whole another level of nuance and thinking going into this mission. And then it's player scores 5 for each objective. And you only get victory points for objectives in No Man's Land. So you guys are going to want to be doing this if you want to get high scores, because most tournaments are battle point heavy for winning and seeding. So if you end up a game where you both are just denying each other the ability or not setting up the objectives, this could really tank both of you. So that'll be interesting. And then the score is the same way: 5 for each in No Man's Land you control through the game, and then turn 5, whoever has the end of the turn gets to do it. This is an interesting thing: is you set them up at the end of the turn, but you also score at the end of the turn. So in battle round 5, I guess the person going second, because if it's your turn, you choose the order of things that happen at the same time. You could set up and score that objective on turn 5 and your opponent will have no chance to counter it. And you can only select one unit to do. All right, so you can't. I was double checking that you couldn't just run away and pop it with multiple units into turn 5 if you're going second. So it's 1 unit, but that gives you a chance to get that extra 5. And with the no limit on objectives, you get, it's maxed at 15. Never mind, my brain was thinking you could do more than that for a second, but no. Yes, you're still maxed at 15, but this gives you an extra chance to do it if you're going second. All right, that's interesting. A lot of these are a little weird, so it's going to be interested to see how they play out in competitive, and once we get used to them, how your strategies adapt for each of these missions. And if any of them just seem too weird or skewed that people, organizers may not run them at really competitive events. So that'll be interesting to see. I'm kind of hoping we see them all because it just varies and just forces you to build your list to be able to deal with all these weird scenarios. Ninth edition kind of settled into, all right, here's my secondaries. The missions played pretty much the same way other than deployment every time. It just gets built. You just got these set meta lists. Just they only had to do these one things. Now, hopefully, if we're using all this, we'll have to have lists that have to do this thing, that thing, another thing over here, that thing, that just lists that are built to be versatile, will have some kind of mobility, and just able to change on the fly between rounds and possibly between turns in the middle of a game if objectives are getting added here or removed there, or things like that. So I actually kind of like that, so I hope they keep these consistent, so keep players on their toes. Not like, all right, I know my TO is going to run these certain type of missions because that's what he's like. I don't have to worry about these. Build my list. They're not something I have to even consider. I mean, actually, all right, I have to be ready to deal with any of these scenarios that pop up. All right, and then the next one is priority targets. At the end of each command phase, players turn and scores 5 victory points for each objective marker they control. All right, so that's pretty much the same, except end of the battle, you get 5 for each objective marker you control as well. So that's the only difference on this one, is everything's the same up till turn. Nope. On this one, turn 5, the player who goes second doesn't score at the end of their turn, but they do get to. Everybody gets to score at the end of the battle. All right, so that's interesting. So that's the only real difference here from a normal mission that we saw all of this edition is there's no bottom of round 5 scoring for the player that wins second. All right, so that actually, I think, does swing the flavor slightly back to going first, but this is the only mission I've seen that is, so you still can't build a go first army. Like, a lot of people do like to go second because of the end of round scoring, so this will be one of the few times where they don't get that bonus. So I think it's fine, and it's used a little back toward first turn player because with the other missions and the way people are set up to play for the most part right now, a lot of people like to go second, so throwing one of these in just isn't that big a deal, I don't think. Excuse me. And then we got a supply drop. At the start of the battle, players randomly select 2 different objective markers in No Man's Land. The first selected is the Alpha objective. The second is the Omega objective. At the start of the 4th battle round, the Alpha objective is removed from the battlefield. At the start of the 5th battle round, all objective markers in No Man's Land apart from the Omega objective were also removed. Alright, so turns 2 and 3, all the objectives are there. Turn 4, Alpha objective is removed. And then 5th battle round, everything in No Man's Land except the Omega is removed. So at the end of the 5th battle round, you're going to have or the start of the 5th battle round, you're only going to have 1 objective in No Man's Land. At the end of each command phase, the player turn and scores 5 victory points for each objective marker they control in No Man's Land. Alright, so only the No Man's objectives count. So you have to push out turns 2 and 3 to hold whatever No Man's Lands are easiest for you, but then knowing on turn 4, you're going to need to be in position to hold everything but the Alpha because it's disappearing, and also in a position on turn 5 to hold the Omega because it will be the only one left. So that's how turn 3, and then so on turn 4, it's 8 victory points. So turn 2 and 3, when all the objectives are there, you get 5. Turn 4, when one of the Alpha is removed, you get 8 for each one you control. And then on turn 5, the player's first turn scores 15 victory points if they control objective markers in No Man's Land, which is pretty much going to be only the Omega. And whoever's second will score at the end of their turn for 15. So they're 5 for each, 5 for each, 8 for each, 15 for the only one. All right. So basically, by turn 5, you're going to need to be in the middle fighting over that one objective. And you could potentially first turn, you're going to have to push turn 4 to make sure you push them off of it. And then turn 5, the player going second is going to have to push you off during their turn because they can hold it at the end. So if one of you if you can deny your opponent this on turn 5, that's going to be a huge swing. Say you're going second, and the bottom of turn 4, you just push everything onto that objective and take them off because they're not going to have a chance to clear you. So then the player who's going first doesn't get those 15. They have to try to clear you off. And even if they do, then going into your turn 5, if you're going second, you get a chance to score at the end. So you could try to re-clear them back off and get it. So I think there's, just off the top of my head, first thoughts of this. This one, I mean, it all depends on the mission name because it could be you're really crushed on, but I think there's definitely a good advantage to going second in this mission specifically. Because it's not like, oh, normally you push them off the middle, they lose 5 points, but they could make it up by taking an objective somewhere else. In this one, there's only one objective that can be scored. All right. And you random select the 2 markers, so it's not like, so you just randomly determine which ones they are. All right. And then we have deploy servo skulls. The objective markers that start the battle in No Man's Land are servo skulls. At the end of each turn, each of these objective markers can be moved up to 6 inches in any direction by the player that controls it. When moving objective markers, they cannot end that move on top of any other objective marker or model or inside impassable terrain or inside impassable parts of terrain features such as the walls of a run. Alright, so the objective markers can't move on top of each other, but you can place them right next to each other so that you can control multiple with one unit if you're moving. It doesn't limit how many you can move, you just have to be able to control it. Yeah, and it doesn't say by a unit, so if you were able to string between multiple objectives with one unit and control all of them, because I'm assuming it's, I haven't seen it written anywhere, but if it's the same as last edition where a single model can't control more than one objective, but units can as long as they have different models to control each one. If you got a bunch of objectives together, you could have one unit moving 2 or 3 objectives each turn if you kept the objective control on them. And then at the end of each turn, the player whose turn this scores VP as the following: 2 for each servo skull that is wholly within 12 inches of their opponent's deployment zone, 5 servo skulls that is wholly within 6 inches of their opponent's deployment zone, and 8 VP for each servo skull that is wholly within their opponent's deployment zone. Alright, so if they aren't within 12 inches of your opponent's deployment zone, you get 0 points for them. And it's wholly within. So, depending on most missions, your objective markers start 12 inches away in most missions, other than the table quarter one where they start 9, in which case that middle one would be scoreable without moving for 2 BP. But so you have to move them at least a couple inches your first to start with before you can start scoring them. But it doesn't start till turn 2, so it gives you a chance to do that. And once you move it towards your opponent's deployment zone, even if your opponent takes it from you, if they can't move it back close enough to your deployment zone, even though they control it, they'll get no points for it. So someone who's really fast that can get there and move these really quickly, those no man land ones toward their opponent's zone, even if their opponent somehow denies them scoring it and controls it, their opponent first move will have to be back toward the middle, and if you moved it your full distance, even if they move it fully back, they're not going to be within 12, so there will be technically no way for them to score that objective that turn. It's going to take them 2 turns to get it. All right, so this is going to be really interesting. And these are cumulative. All right, so if you get it within 6 inches, they're worth 7. If you get it in your opponent's deployment zone, they're worth 15. All right, so that's a little better. That'll help with the scoring a little bit. So, but basically, once they get a skull close to your zone, you need to sweep them off it so they don't get the points. But you're not going to get points for doing it because you're going to have to move it so far. So that's like, there may be turns where you have to determine, all right, do I let them score there 7 or 15 so I can score points? Or do I deny them their 7 or 15, but then I'm not going to have the resources to also go score my points? Because just because you take the objective back doesn't mean you get points because it's not close enough to your opponent's deployment zone. All right, so this is a really interesting mission. Like this will take people. I think this will take most people a couple playthroughs to really get a hang of what's the best way to attack this mission. Do I go for like 1 or 2 real hard and try to get them into as far into my deployment zone as I can, or do I do that with 1 and then just try to throw away a couple units to move these other ones real quick toward the opponent, even knowing I'm not going to control them, but knowing it's going to take them 2 turns to move it back where they can even start getting points. All right, so there's going to be some extra in-depth stuff here that you're going to have to process and consider based on how quickly you can or can't get there based on your list and your opponent's list. So I'm interested to play this one. This one's going to be a little extra thinking on this one. All right, and then the last one is Vital Ground. If you draw this and the Hidden Supplies mission rule card, discard this card and draw a new primary mission card. All right. After setting up the battlefield, remove the objective marker in No Man's Land that is closest to the center of the battlefield. All right. When most of those is the one dead center. At the end of the command phase, the player whose turn is scores VP as follows. If they control the objective marker in their deployment zone, they score 2. For each objective marker they control in No Man's Land, they get 5. And if they control the objective marker in their opponent's deployment zone, they get 6. All right, so it's only 6 points you're going to take the one all the way in your opponent's deployment zone. So that's kind of interesting seeing that. Normally that'd be like an 8 or a 10 or something, but so you only get 1 extra point for pushing all the way over there. And then that's the same for turn 3 and turn 4, and then turn 5. Points stay the same, but once again, second player gets to score at the end of their turn. All right, so that's all of the primary mission cards. So we got some that are very similar to last edition. We got one that's basically old ITC from 8th edition. And then we had a couple new, very interesting ones that you're going to have to definitely plan for in your list building. You can't just build for the one type of mission we had. So I really like the difference and the skewing here. Like every one of those takes a different strategy, a different plan. So you can't just walk in like, oh, I'm playing Tau. All right, I need to control 1 on this side, and they're not like, like there are certain armies you know, all right, this is how I play them because every mission was the same. Now you got to think, all right, how do I play this army and play this different mission? So that's really, it's going to hopefully help with the stagnation of building these lists that do these 1 or 2 things really good because that's what these missions and secondaries need. And I don't need to worry about doing any of the other possible things you could do in the game because I'm just maxing in on points on the one mission style we have. Now you can't do that, which I really like. All right, then the mission rule deck. These will be the special rules for each mission. Chilling Rain, no additional mission rules apply. All right. Sweeping Clear. In this mission, if a player controls an objective marker at the end of their command phase, that objective marker remains under their control, even if they have no models within range of it, unless their opponent controls it at the end of any subsequent command phase. All right, so you get sticky objectives that turn on and off in the command phases. Then Hidden Supplies. In this mission, players must set up 1 additional objective marker in No Man's Land, unless the chosen battlefield mission rule is also in effect. Before setting up this new objective marker, players must first move the objective marker in the center of the battlefield 6 inches towards one of the corners of the battlefield. If No Man's Land touches any corner of the battlefield, Alexa, stop. If no man's land touches any corner of the battlefield, you must move the objective marker towards one of those corners. Players then set up the new objective marker 6 inches from the center battlefield towards the diagonally opposite corner of the battlefield to the previously moved objective marker. Center directly towards one of the corners. Right. So basically, you got your objective marker dead center, and then you're going to have to either move it this way, like this, one of these two ways, or one of these two ways, which doesn't matter, because if you go this way, the other one's going to go here. If you go this way, the other one's going there. So it really only matters whether you go towards the 2 deployment zones or towards the... Well, I guess it depends on... I was thinking table quarters. So it really just depends on the terrain and stuff, so you probably have to roll off, unless you both really agree on whether you're going to skew them this way or this way. But once that's decided, you'll equally have them as close to your deployment zone. So the objectives will be equidistant from you both, no matter how it's set up. It'll just determine on terrain and how you've both set up your missions. Although I'm guessing this will be set up before deployment, so you can deploy for it. It's just whether, I guess, you think you're faster or slower, whether you want it skewed towards certain terrain piece or something. And then we have bind fields. In this mission, each time an advanced roll of 6 is made for unit, it suffers 1 mortal wound. Alright, that's probably something you may or may not remember as the game goes, but advanced roll of 6 is 1 mortal wound. Interested to see the Votan rules, because if they just always count as a 3, then they won't have to worry about this. And then like stuff like bikes, if they still have a just auto go 6 but don't roll, do they just completely ignore this? So be interested to see how that plays in with some of that, but it's only on 6 to advance, so it'd probably take a couple mortal wounds a game, so I don't think this is a huge thing. But there will be certain situations where a 1 wound model needs to advance to an objective and rolls the so there will be certain situations where it matters, but most of the time it won't. Then we got targets of opportunity. In this mission, if a player is using tactical missions, then each time that player determines which secondary mission cards are active for them, if they have fewer than 3 active secondary mission cards, that player draws from their secondary mission deck until they have 3 secondary mission cards. Alright, so this, if you're doing tactical, you get 3 cards instead of 2 to try to achieve each turn, so that's very helpful. In this mission, if a player is using fixed mission, then in addition to the 2 fixed mission cards, that player will also draw cards from their secondary deck during the battle. At the end of the select secondary mission step, that player should retrieve their secondary mission deck and remove all the fixed mission cards they did not select at the start of that step, then shuffle the remaining cards. And at the start of each of the player's command phases, that player has fewer than 3 active secondary mission cards, including their fixed mission cards. They draw their secondary mission deck until they have 3 secondary mission cards. Players have access to the new order stratagem and can spend CP to use it after drawing their secondary mission card if they wish. Remember that fixed mission cards cannot be discarded for any reason. Alright, so this, if you're doing tactical, you get an extra 1. If you're doing fixed, you get 1 tactical mission card, which help if you need the scoring, but it's also nice because I believe it gives you access to discarding it for that extra CP. So if you feel you're going to get your 40 with your pre-picked secondaries, it's basically just giving you an extra CP every turn. Alright, so that's interesting. Then we have Scrambler Fields. In this mission, players' units with the Infiltrator's ability cannot be set up within range of an objective marker that is either in no man's land or their opponent's deployment zone. A player's units with the Scout ability that make a move before the first turn cannot end that move within range of the objective markers either in no man's land or their opponent's deployment zone. If any rule is used to redeploy a unit, the rule cannot be used to set up that unit within range of an objective marker in no man's land. When a player's reserved or strategic reserve units are set up on the battlefield, they cannot be set up within range of an objective marker that is either in no man's land or the opponent's deployment zone. Alright, so this basically, instead of, like, we had the one mission last edition where you couldn't scout or deploy, infiltrate into the middle at all. You can, doesn't do that. You can move in the middle. You just can't be within range of an objective marker, which I'm assuming is the 3 inches. So not as restrictive, but you basically can't start on the objective marker. So you can't basically sticky an objective marker in the middle turn 1 if you had sticky on some of your infiltrating units. Same with scouts. And then the big thing, I think, is that when you come in from reserves, you can't come in within range of objective marker, no man's land, or opponent's deployment zone. So you actually have your objective markers helping you zone out from deep strikes and reserves. So that could be useful. Then we have delayed reserves. In this mission, until the start of the third battle round, each time a reserve or strategic reserve unit risks to revive on the battlefield, the controlling player must take a reserves roll for it. To do so, that player rolls 1d6. On the 3+, that unit arrives on the battlefield. Otherwise, the reserve roll failed and the unit does not arrive this turn. Oh, wow. So basically, if you have something come in turn 1, this affects what most people. This is only going to be on turn 2 because you have to come in turn 3. You're not allowed to come in turn 1 for most stuff. So basically, you're going to bring some in turn 2. You got to roll a dice on a 1 or a 2. You have to hold them in reserve till turn 3. This is a throwback to earlier editions where if you put something in reserve, you had to roll every turn to see if they came in. So you never knew when they were coming in. Alright, so this is just something you have to double think on what you're putting in reserve because you don't know that you can bring them in turn 2. Reserves aren't quite as reliable. So these last two are really playing with the reserves a little bit. So which is nice because if you build a reserve heavy army that's all about that, staying off the board, drop it in turn 2. Well, now you can't necessarily do that the way you want to. And then we have a chosen battlefield. In this mission, objective markers are not placed as shown in the deployment cards drawn. Instead, players roll off at the start of the place objective marker step, then alternate setting objective markers one at a time, starting with the winner of the roll-off. One objective must be placed wholly within each deployment zone, and the remaining objective markers must be played wholly within no man's land, as shown on the deployment card. Objective markers must be placed more than 6 inches away from any battlefield edge, and more than 9 inches away from all other objective markers. If for whatever reason it is not possible to set up an objective marker as described above, it is not placed on the battlefield. If any rules require a player to set up additional objective markers, e.g. hidden supplies, during the placement of marker step, players set them as described on this mission rule card. If any rules restrict players to remove one or more objective markers, do so after setting them all up. Alright, so this is interesting because it says you have to put one in each deployment zone, but it doesn't say you have to place it in your own deployment zone. So you win this roll-off, you could place it right at the very edge of your opponent's deployment zone, somewhere where it's not easy for them to hide and hold it, depending on if you're an aggressive or a defensive army, whether you're not worried about placing yours very defensively, you want to make sure they can't really have theirs in the defensive spot. Alright, so there's some play there. That'll be very interesting. So it's just another thing where there's some strategy and thought you have to put behind it. So if you have this, and then player plays terrain, and then so this could get really interesting on some of these. Hopefully the gameplay is faster, like they're saying, because a bunch of these are adding extra steps that are going to slow you down before you get to starting the game. Then we have Maelstrom of Battle. In this mission, shuffle the remaining mission rule cards together before drawing 2 new mission rule cards. If either of these new mission rule cards is Chilling Raid, discard that mission rule card and draw 2 additional new mission rule cards for a total of 3 new mission rule cards. Play all the draw mission rule cards to the battle. Alright, so you can get a bunch of these if you draw that one. Supply lines. In this mission, if the player controls objective marker in their own deployment zone at the start of their command phase, roll 1d6. On a 4+, the player gains 1 CP. Alright, so there's 50-50 chance of gaining a CP if you control your objective marker in your deployment. Secret Intel. In this mission, in each player's command phase, the first time that players draw secondary mission cards that phase, that player can draw 1 additional secondary mission card and then discard one of their active secondary mission cards. Alright, so just your first turn, if you're doing tactical, you get to draw 3, discard 1. Just you have a better start to the game. Vox Tactic. In this mission, the command Reroll Stratagem and New Ord Stratagem are both 2 CP to use. Alright, that's interesting. So 2 CP to reroll and 2 CP for the New Order Stratagem. Alright, so that could be really huge. I know a lot of people like to use that reroll. So, especially now since we start with 0 and start going, this would really limit rerolls early in the game, I would assume. Alright, now we're going to roll into the secondary mission deck. So we're going to start with fixed. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fixed missions you can choose from. They can also be drawn, which we'll see, and they do a little different stuff in your own, but basically you can draw up to 2 of these if you're doing fixed to play a little more like 9th edition, just achieving the same ones the whole game. So the first one is behind enemy lines. At the end of your turn, if 2 or more units from your army, excluding aircraft, are wholly within your opponent's deployment zone, the secondary mission is achieved, you score 4 victory points. If at the end of your turn only 1 unit from your army, excluding aircraft, is wholly within your opponent's deployment zone, this secondary mission is still achieved, but in this instance you score 2 VP instead of 4 VP. If you're using tactical missions, then when this secondary mission is achieved, you score 1 extra victory point for a maximum of 5. Alright, so pretty much the same it is now. 2 for 1 unit, 4 for 2 units. So if you're using tactical, you get 1 extra point for it, and then you discard it. Alright, then we have assassination. If you are using fixed missions, and while this secondary is active, each time an enemy character model is destroyed, you score 4 victory points. If you're using tactical missions, then at the end of the turn, if either of these conditions below are satisfied, the secondary mission is achieved, you score 5 victory points. 1 or more enemy characters are destroyed during this turn. All character units from your opponent's army roster have been destroyed during the battle. Note that if using tactical missions, the secondary mission is achieved even if such a unit was destroyed and then subsequently resurrected for any reason. Alright, so on fixed, you have to kill the unit for 4. For tactical, even if they're resurrected, you get it. It looks like for fixed, you don't. So on fixed, if they're resurrected, you don't get the points. You still have to try to kill them. But on tactical, you get it. And if you killed them all in previous turns, say you draw this turn 4, but you only had 1 or 2 characters that are already dead, you would get to achieve this. But if you killed one of their characters and the other is still alive when you draw this, and you don't kill that character, you don't get this. You have to have killed all their characters or kill one during the turn you have this active. Alright. Bring it down. While the secondary mission is active, each time an enemy monster or vehicle model is destroyed, you score 2 victory points and an extra VP for each of the conditions that are satisfied below. All are cumulative. Alright, so the destroyed model has one's character 10, 15, or 20. So it's 2 VP, 3 VP if they're 10 or more, 4 VP if they're 15 or more, 5 VP if they're 20 or more. Note that VP are scored even if such a model is destroyed and is subsequently resurrected for any reason. If you score any VP from the secondary mission during a turn, then at the end of that turn, the secondary mission is achieved. Alright, if you're using tactical missions, then when this secondary mission is achieved, you score an extra 1 VP. However, using tactical missions, you cannot score more than 8 VP in total for this secondary mission. Excuse me. Alright, so each time a name monster is destroyed, you score 2 VP. VP scored even if such model is destroyed, and so the rest. If you score any VP from this secondary mission during a turn, at the end of that turn, the secondary mission is achieved. Alright, so I'm guessing for tactical, you can get, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. So say you kill 2 knights, you would get 10 points. For tactical, you would get 6. You could get up to 6 points for killing one thing, but you could only get up to 2 more points. So you max at 8. So say you killed 2 knights, you still only get 8 points instead of 11 or whatever. Alright, and then engage on all fronts. At the end of your turn, if you have 1 or more qualifying units, see below, from your army wholly within 3 or more different table quarters, and those units are all more than 3 inches away from any other table quarter, this secondary mission is achieved and you score 4 victory points. If you have qualifying units in 4 different table quarters, so it's 4 VP if you have qualifying units in 4 different table quarters, or 2 VP if you have qualifying units in 3 different table quarters. While a unit is battle shot, it is not a qualifying unit. If when you draw the secondary card, you only have 1 or 2 qualifying units remaining in your army, you can discard the secondary mission card and draw a new secondary mission card. If you're using tactical missions, and when this secondary mission is achieved, you scored 1 extra victory point for a maximum of 5. Alright, so if you're using tactical and you have 2 or less units left, you can discard it and get a different one. But otherwise, you'll get 3 points if you can have units in 3 table quarters, 5 points for, and if you're doing it as your fixed, it's 2 points for 3 table quarters, 4 points for 4, and you can't be battle shocked, and you have to be more than 3 inches away from the other table quarter, which is a little easier than the 6 inches that was before. All right, then we have Storm Hostile Objective. At the end of your turn, if either of the below conditions are satisfied, this secondary mission is achieved. You score 4 victory points if you're using fixed mission, or 5 victory points if you're using tactical missions. All right, so it's either of the below, not both. All right, so we have control. 1 or more objective markers that were controlled by your opponent at the start of the turn. Your opponent did not control any objective markers at the start of your turn. You control 1 or more objective markers that you did not control at the start of your turn. All right, so your opponent controls any objective markers. You only score this if you take one that they control, but if your opponent controls no objective markers, you just have to take one you don't control. All right. This secondary cannot be achieved during the first battle round. If you generally do the secondary mission during the first battle round, draw a new secondary mission card and shuffle this one back into the deck. All right, so if you take this, if you get this as a tactical on turn 1, you put it back in, you shuffle it back, you draw a different one and shuffle it back in the deck. All right, so basically, you either have to take an objective for your opponent, or if they control none, take one you didn't control, and you get 4 victory points for fixed and 5 for tactical. All right. Cleanse. In your shooting phase, you can select 1 or more units from your army that are not battle shocked and are eligible to shoot. Until the end of your turn, the units you selected are not eligible to shoot or declare a charge. At the end of your turn, each objective marker that is not within your deployment zone that you control, that has 1 or more of these selected units within range of it, is cleansed. If 1 or more objective markers are cleansed by your army this turn, the secondary mission is achieved. You score a number of VP depending on the number of objective markers cleansed by your army, as follows. 1 objective marker cleansed, 2 VP if you're fixed, 3 if tactical, 2 or more cleansed, 4 if you're using fixed, 5 if tactical. Alright, so 1 units from your army that are not battle shocked and eligible to shoot. At the end of your turn, each objective marker is not within your opponent's deployment zone that you control, and there's 1 more. Alright, so you don't even have to have the enemy off it, you just have to make 1 of your units not shoot or charge, just basically do nothing for the turn while they're in range of it, and still control it at the end of the turn, and you complete this. Alright. Deploy teleport homers. In your shooting phase, you can select 1 unit from your army that is not battle shocked and is eligible to shoot. Until the end of your turn, that unit is not eligible to shoot or declare a charge. At the end of your turn, if that unit is within your opponent's deployment zone or within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, it deploys a teleport homer at that location. The secondary mission is achieved. You score a number of VP depending on where the teleport homer was deployed as follows. Central battlefield, 2 VP if you're using fixed, 3 for tactical. Opponent's deployment zone, 4 VP if they're fixed, 5 if using tactical. Alright, so basically, just in your shooting phase, just like 1 of your armies is not battle shocked until the end of your turn, they're not able to shoot, declare a charge. So basically, all of these, like, you're just basically doing actions for the most part with a lot of these, but it's not. So far, none of it's like infantry or biker restricted. It's just like you can do it with a knight, you can do it with a rhino, you can do it with anything. And so basically, you just have to within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield or within your opponent's deployment zone. And the units within your opponent's deployment zone doesn't say wholly within. So as long as 1 model is even partially within your opponent's deployment zone, you can do this. All right, and then we have all right. So that's all the fixed, and now we're rolling into the tactical. So these will, if you're doing fixed objectives, you will never have to even worry about these unless you get the one weird one where you get a tactical one in addition. All right, so the first one is investigate signals. In your shooting phase, you can select 1 or more units from your army that are not battle shocked and are eligible to shoot. Until end of turn, the units are selected are not eligible to shoot or declare a charge. At the end of your turn, each corner of the battlefield that has 1 or more of these selected units wholly within 9 inches of it is scanned by your army. If 1 or more corners are scanned by your army, the secondary mission is achieved. You score 2 VP for each corner scanned by your army this turn. Alright, so you could do up to get up to 8 points on this if you scan all 4 corners. So basically, you just have to have a unit do an action and within 9 inches of each corner of the battlefield, 1 of your selected units wholly within 9 inches of this. Yes, you have to be wholly within 9 inches of a corner of the battlefield, with one of your units, and you get 2 VP, and you can do it in all 4 table quarters each turn. Table corners. No prisoners. While the secondary mission is active, each time an enemy unit is destroyed, you score 2 VP to a maximum of 5 VP. Note the VP are scored even if such unit is destroyed and is subsequently resurrected for any reason. You score any VP for the secondary mission during a turn. At the end of that turn, the secondary mission is achieved. So you get 2 VP for killing a unit, 4 for killing 2. If you kill 3 or more, you still only get 5. Alright, fairly simple. Extend battle lines. At the end of your turn, if you control 1 or more objective marker in your own deployment zone, and you also control 1 or more objective marker in no man's land, this secondary mission is achieved. You score 5 victory points. So you have to control 1 in your deployment zone and 1 in no man's land. If you only have 1 unit remaining in your army, then the secondary mission is instead achieved at the end of your turn if you control 1 objective marker in no man's land, but in this instance, you score 2 instead of 5. Alright, so even if you're only down to 1 unit, you can score this, but it has to be in no man's land only. Right. And then we have a defend stronghold. At the end of your opponent's turn, or at the end of the battle, whichever comes first, if you control 1 or more objective markers in your own deployment zone, this secondary mission is achieved. You score 3 VP. So this is at the end of your opponent's turn, or at the end of the battle, but it's the one in your deployment zone, so hopefully you can do it fairly well. This secondary mission cannot be achieved during the first battle round. If you draw the secondary mission in the first battle round, draw a new secondary mission card and shuffle this secondary mission card back into your secondary mission deck. Alright. Overwhelming Force. While this secondary mission is active, each time an enemy unit that started the turn within range of an objective marker destroyed, you score 3 VP to a maximum of 5 VP. Note, the VP are scored even if such a unit is destroyed and subsequently resurrected for any reason. If you score any VP from the secondary mission during a turn, then the end of the secondary mission is achieved. Alright, so just kill a unit within range of an objective, you score 3 victory points. So if you kill 2 units or more, you get 5 victory points. Secure no man's land. At the end of your turn, if you control 2 or more objective markers in no man's land, this secondary mission is achieved. You score 5 victory points. If at the end of the turn you only control 1 objective marker in no man's land, the secondary mission is still achieved, but this is you score 2 instead of 5. Alright, so just control objectives in no man's land. Area denial. At the end of your turn, if 1 or more units from your army, excluding battle shock units, are wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, and there are no enemy units wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, this secondary mission is achieved and you score 5 VP. If at the end of your turn there are 1 or more enemy units wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, but there are no units within 3 inches of the center of the battlefield, then this secondary mission is still achieved, but in this instance you score 3 VP instead of 5. Alright, so basically you have to have a unit within 6 inches of the battlefield and make sure there's no enemies there for 5, or have 1 unit within 6 inches of the battlefield and make sure there's no enemies within 3 of the center for 3. Alright, then we have a tempting target. When this secondary mission card is drawn, your opponent must select 1 objective marker in no man's land. At the end of your turn, if you control that selected objective marker, this secondary mission is achieved and you score 5 VP. Alright, fairly simple. Capture enemy outpost. At the end of your turn, if you control 1 or more objective markers in your opponent's deployment zone, this secondary mission is achieved and you score 8 victory points. Alright, so so if you control the one in your opponent's deployment zone, you get 8 VP. Alright, so this one you definitely hope you don't troll early, but might possibly be able to do later in the game. Alright, so then we have the Gambits. So basically, end of turn 3, if you decide you want to try a Gambit, what you do is you take these cards, you put the Proceedus plan to the side, you shuffle and randomly discard one of the other 3, and then you take the 2 that are left and put Proceedus plan back in, and then you can choose to use Proceedus plan and just continue scoring primary normally, or choose one of the 2 Gambits that you have left in your hand. So the first one is delaying tactics. Determine distraction target. Your distraction target will be equal to half the number of enemy units that were within engagement range of 1 or more units from your army, rounding up at the end of your 5th turn. If your distraction target is less than 4, it is increased to 4. Alright, so you have to basically try to get into engagement range with your opponent on turn 5 and survive to still be in engagement range at the end of turn 5. At the end of your 5th turn, roll 1d6 for each enemy unit that is within engagement range of 1 or more units from your army. Add 1 to the result if that enemy unit is battle shocked, and subtract 1 if one or more of the units from your army that are within engagement range of it are battle shocked. On a 4+, the enemy unit has been successfully delayed. If the number of enemy units that have been successfully delayed is greater than or equal to your distraction target, this gambit is successfully completed and you score 30 victory points. Alright, so basically, you have to, for every unit you have in combat, you have to roll a dice. If nobody's battle shocked on either side, you need a 4-up. If you're battle shocked, you need a 5-up. If your opponent's battle shocked, you need a 3-up. If you're both battle shocked, you still need a 4-up. And you have to roll basically 4 4-ups to achieve this. So that means if you have less than 4 units in combat, at the end of your turn 5, this cannot be achieved. And if you have 4 in combat, then you're going to have to roll 4 4-ups. Unless all the enemy are battle shocked, then you get some 3-ups. So this is, to reasonably have a chance of doing this, you need to have like 6 or 7 of your units in combat with the enemy at the end of your 5th turn. And hopefully a couple more battle shocks for you some 3-ups. And then you might reasonably have a chance of doing this. So most people you think are going to take gambits when they're losing. So if you're losing, you probably don't have a lot of units left. So getting that many units in combat and having them all survive and not be battle shocked doesn't seem very realistic. And you have to choose this on turn 3. And your opponent will know this. So on their turn 4 or 5, depending on when they're going first or second, they can try to back away from you to deny you the 30 victory points. Or move block you so that you're only going to be able to charge 1 or 2 things. Yeah, so that doesn't seem like it's something that's going to be really feasible to do. So I definitely wouldn't want to put my faith in that happening. Then the next one is orbital strike coordinates. At the end of your 5th turn, if one or more units from your army that are not battle shocked are wholly within 9 inches of a corner of the battlefield, and those units are not within your own deployment zone, roll 2d6. Add 1 to the result for every other corner of the battlefield that has one or more units from your army wholly within 9 inches of it, excluding units that are battle shocked or within engagement range of enemy units. If the final result is 12 or more, this gambit is successfully completed. You score 30 victory points. Alright, so you have to have 1 unit not battle shocked, wholly within 9 inches of a table corner that is not in your deployment zone. That's the first thing. So you have to have 1 unit that does that. And then every other unit that has within 9 inches, wholly within 9 inches of a table corner, and these can be your deployment. The extra ones can be your deployment zone. Add to it. So best case scenario, you have 4 units left, and you manage to get all 4 of them wholly within 9 inches of every table quarter. You would need to roll a 9 or higher. But once again, your opponent knows you're going to try to do this, so if they can stop you from getting into, if it's like a lot of the missions have 2 table corners in your deployment zone. So if your opponent can just deny you from getting into the 2 on their side, you won't even have a chance to roll for this. But even if you do, if they can deny you some of the other ones, you're probably at best looking at like having to roll a 10, 11, or 12. So this one you could get lucky to do because it's just 1 roll off as opposed to the other. You have to get a lot of things in. So this one seems possible. You get lucky 12, get a lucky 11, 10. So this one could possibly happen. This definitely, if I had the option, I would definitely choose this over delaying tactics if I had to go with a gambit. Alright, and then we have emergency evacuation. Determine evacuation target. Your evacuation target will be equal to half the number of units from your army that are on the battlefield at the end of the battle rounding up. So this is at the end of the battle. Including units embarked within transport models that are on the battlefield. If your evacuation target is less than 4, it is increased to 4. At the end of your 5th turn. So the end of your 5th turn. Alright, so it's not the end of the battle. Alright, so evacuation target is equal to half the number of units from your army that battlefield at the end of the battle. or its evacuation units. At the end of your 5th turn, roll 1d6 for each unit of your army that's wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, subtracting 1 from the result if that unit is battle shocked. On a 4+, that unit and any units embarked within it are marked for evacuation. Alright, so this looks like at the end of your 5th turn, you roll for your units. But if you're going first, your opponent would have a chance to kill your units, in which case your evacuation target could go down from what it is, but you would still have a number. So really, your opponent could make it easier for you to score this by killing units. Alright, that's interesting. But once again, it's just like the other. You have to roll 4-ups. I don't see. Does this say anything? You have subtracting 1 for battle shock, but you never get bonuses for your opponent being battle shock for this one. So at best, you're going to need to roll 4-4-ups, which means you're going to have at least 4 units within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, wholly within 6 inches. So that's not a huge area. So your opponent, depending on whether you're going first or second, on their bottom of turn 4 or top of turn 5, and depending on what their turn is, if they just push to the center there, and a lot of times there's going to be an objective there, they could just deny you even be able to get enough units into the center to do it. Or they could charge you or move block you or so. Once again, this doesn't seem that feasible or something that would happen that often. If you have enough units to do this and your opponent doesn't have enough units to keep you out, you are probably already winning the game. You would have probably got close to your 30 with primary anyway, so you're really not getting that much by taking a gamble and hoping on rolling 4-ups. So I don't see delaying tactics or emergency evacuation really swinging a game much, because to achieve them, you will really have to have enough units to do it. And if you have that many units and your opponent can't stop you from doing that to start with, you're probably going to do good on primary anyway, so you're not really gaining that much. I mean, 30 seems like a lot, but you could have probably scored 20, 25 on primary anyway. The orbital strikes, if you have like a fast army, like some Elder jet bikes or something, then maybe you could be in a weird scenario where you're losing, not doing good on primary, and you just run a bunch of jet bikes or something to corners right at the very end of the game and get a high roll and do it. So orbital strike seems like it could possibly be the one to worry about for Gambits. The other two do not. But you randomly discard one each time, so even if you want to go for a Gambit, there's a 1 in 3 chance you won't even have strike coordinates to pick from. So you really, really have to be out of it with no chance to go for that, in which case, if you probably don't have a lot of units left anyway, so you're going to have to hide what ones you do. But then if you're hiding them, you better have a lot of speed to then all of a sudden, turn 5, slam to the corners and get wholly within 9, and then get a lucky roll. But if you're hiding like that, well, now you're probably not achieving your secondaries very much. So yeah, you're gaining. If you get lucky and pull the prior back, now you were probably already losing if you took this, but then you're restricting yourself from scoring secondaries because you're trying to hide. So I don't see these. I'm sure only like 1 in 1,000 chance for especially orbital strike coordinates will swing. Somebody will win by 1 or 2 points by pulling off that 30 when they probably would have lost by 4 or 5 if they'd have played it out regular. But I don't see this being something you reliably depend on or that happens on any kind of regular basis. But when it does, I'm sure it'll be a great story of somebody telling a friend how they pulled it off, or you getting to complain about how you got screwed, and and if it happens on a battle report or something, it'll be something that be good for views, I'm assuming. Alright, so that's really interesting. And that's all they have for the cards. So 5 deployments. Seem nice, couple new ones. Primary missions. Really excited with that. Some are very similar to 9th with slight tweaks. There's one that's a throwback to 8th edition ITC, and there's some that are just completely new and different that will really force people to adapt and change how they build and play lists. And then the secondaries are interesting. We'll see how that plays out with only having 2 fixed and then the drawing 2. And depending on how you build your list, are you fast, able to get to place on the board quickly, to adapt to which ones you draw, but you also have the ability to discard one for the extra CP. Is the randomness not being as worth the extra CP you can possibly get? Like, we'll see how the tournament community, competitive players, shake out on which one is better, tactical or fixed. I think most people lean into fixed to start with if they're used to that from last edition. People just getting into competitive that maybe played more Tempest or Maelstrom last edition may lean more into that because that's how they're comfortable playing. And then the top players will assess the data, see what's working, and we'll see them probably skew one way or the other, or maybe determine certain armies are better in one or the other. So that's what I'm interested to see how that plays out. I'll probably playtest both in once all the points and stuff are out when I start doing some playtesting games, getting ready for ATC. But overall, looks interesting. Gambit, I don't think is going to be the big boogeyman everybody was making it out to be, was all worried about. Two of them, delaying tactics and emergency evacuation, I really don't think are something you have to worry about. Orbital strike coordinates could possibly swing a game if someone mathed it out and they thought they were going to only be able to get like 20 primary, 15, 20 primary, and they were going to lose by 5 or 10 points. If they get this Hail Mary pulled off, they'll be able to jump over. But you're looking at a close game already. I don't think very often somebody who's running away with a game is going to lose to this. I think it's just someone who's just can math out that they're slightly ahead and it's going to work out slightly ahead no matter what their opponent does without this is where this is going to swing. So, which is, I think, fine in a tight game. Someone taking a basically 1-4 at best gamble, I would say, if they get all the bonuses, but most likely more like much less significant than that chance to pull it off is fine and keeps the game interesting. But I think if you're really getting blown out, this isn't going to. If you pull it off, I think it's more going to just make your score look a little better in the loss, which may be worth doing in like team tournament or point differential type tournaments. But we're just straight battle points where it doesn't matter if you win by 1 or 50 points. It's not going to be as big a deal, I don't think. But that's all for the Leviathan mission decks, and I'll be back with you guys with some more videos later. Thank you.